But the number one thing I think to achieve that and achieve kind of anything is to take every chance you can to talk to the local people. And there's lots and lots of different ways I've found to do that. Sometimes it might be even taking a day trip or a day tour, in a small group, because you'll get to meet local guides and, they're paid to talk to you. So they're definitely going to talk to you like that's, and they're knowledgeable and interested in meeting foreign people. So that's one way. I just tend to, over the years, travel has made me very confident in talking to strangers. That's one of the many things I think that travel has taught me. I used to be quite shy, and now I'll talk to anyone, especially in a foreign country. And so I'll just kind of take any opportunity I can to have a good chat to someone. So, whether it's because we're standing in line at waiting to get into a museum, or, the waitress in a restaurant, or, anyone. I will find a way to talk to them. My son has this habit now of rolling his eyes because he sees me getting into these deep conversations, and he's like, oh, here we go again. We're going to be stuck here for 15 minutes again. But I hope I'm just actually role modeling great behavior. But often it's, talking to the locals where I'll find out, the things I really want to know more about.
That is a reoccurring theme with when we talk to people about what makes travel special to them. It always comes down to the people, and it makes perfect sense. What are these locations without the people that you meet? You can stare and look at a building all you want, but if there's no history behind it, if there's no personality to it, based on the people that live and work through it, I don't know, the trip loses significance. So
yeah, absolutely. And I've seen that, especially traveling with a child. He's like a really curious kid anyway, but still it's not the same if you stood him in front of a museum full of like stuff to read, compared to, for example, we were in Cambodia a couple of years ago, and we got to meet a woman who was in her 80s, 70s, 80s, and she told us the story about how she had actually lost all her siblings during the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot's regime. And, that is something that, being able to talk to her has stuck with, well, me as well, but especially my son, way more than any kind of, museum visit or history documentary or anything ever would, because it's a real person who's had this real experience. So.
Right. Yeah.
One thing I want to talk about is, and we briefly touched on it at the beginning, is when people are traveling to less resourceful or less privileged countries, finding the line between actually being a thoughtful traveler versus, and I think Bob actually did some research on this, the term is like either white savior or white savior complex, and wanting to help and actually hurting more than helping. And it's more just about your ego and your self-esteem, and like wanting to give, but just because you want to give, not actually knowing what they want.
Yeah, giving because it feels good to you, but not really. Yeah. I think it's a big and a really important issue. There's lots I have to say about it, but the basic, for a start, if we go back to the idea of volunteer tourism, that started off being very altruistic and quite small scale and useful, but these days so many people want to do a kind of a volunteer trip, that there's there's quite an industry in creating volunteer trips that might be doing things that are completely not needed or unnecessary. There's also the idea that if you go somewhere, the typical thing is to build a building for someone, but then they'll take these volunteers who have no experience in building buildings, and they'll go there and they'll do it, but they've actually taken that work away from local people. So often it's really just the money that you need and not the feel-good experience of actually physically helping them out with something. So that's another part of it. There's horrifying things going on in the world, like the orphanage tourism idea in places like Cambodia, where there are orphanages that you can visit, but in fact the kids in there have parents, but their parents have sent them there, or they've been kind of taken in some cases, just because it's a money-making service. And so that orphanage is really just a kind of a front for someone making a lot of money, but at the expense of these kids who actually do have parents, but sometimes they're bussed in for the day, or sometimes they live there, longer term. And, I mean, it's horrifying to think of that. And then, Westerners come along and think that they're doing something good because they're meeting these kids who need help, blah, blah, blah. But it's, fully white savior kind of stuff. It's horrifying. So
I have not heard of that.
No.
Yeah. It's awful. Like, it's heartbreaking to think about this sort of stuff, especially, as a parent of a kid, to think that that you would think that, it's horrifying. But
Right.
so that's kind of a good example of it being, it's really hard to know the right way to help people. But I guess my best way I've found so far is to find usually small companies who are doing really sustainable long-term, or have a really sustainable and long-term approach. Like, I've gone on trips with companies who are working long-term with locals in another country and helping them to create something that they can sustain, like helping them to create a tourism business. For example, we went to a little village in Fiji that had been affected by a cyclone, and they, were really needing some, they're really poor, more poor than the areas around them, needed some help. And the company that we went with had helped them to set up a business where they would have a cultural lunch for groups of visitors. So they, taught them how to set up the business and what they'd need to do, and things like hygiene and stuff, so that that all worked out. And then small tourist groups would come in, spend the day with them. We would all cook together. We would have a carver ceremony together, and all these kind of useful things. And and we would pay for that as tourists. And that was their business that was beginning to become a sustainable thing to bring income to the village. But it's really hard to figure out which of those, where you can go to get the good stuff, which is actually, which companies are really truly helping. I think, the only way is really to try and do as much research as you can.
That's what I was going to say. It ties back into the research, which is so important. But one thing I want to say, that wanting to help people and getting gratification from it, it isn't in itself a bad thing. Like, it's okay to be motivated and feel good personally about doing good for other people. The thing is, like we just mentioned, and like you just said, it's important to make sure that the thing that you're doing actually is beneficial to the people that you're helping, and there isn't some facade. That blows my mind with the orphanage thing.
It's horrifying, isn't it?
Truly horrifying.
So the research should consist around making sure that the people you want to help need the help you want to give. Right. So and that should be the goal. That's the number one goal. Don't go in with the mind, I want to help someone this way. What do they need, and how can I help in that way? And feel good about it, because you're doing good and you're genuinely helping people.
Oh, but, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. You're right. Yeah. You should feel good about it, because it is you could do anything with that money, and it is good. It's a good thing to be doing with it. But make sure you do research, and it's causing no harm for a start, and hopefully being really beneficial and sustainable in the longer term. There's no point giving someone a handout. For example, when we went to this village in Fiji, they said to us, don't bring gifts for the kids, don't bring lollies, don't bring little toys, because then that kind of sets them up for this, that's what Westerners do. When the tourists come, they bring us all this stuff, and we just will wait for it the next time, kind of thing. So they said it's fine to bring some secondhand clothes. So, we collected some of them and took them, and they would share them out to the kids that needed them, but not to give them this expectation or this kind of, building up this thinking that the Westerners will just come along and give us stuff. We don't need to, do this work ourselves either. So, it's so tricky though.
It is. Yeah. Another thing that I want to mention is you need to consider the amount of time that you have, because if you only have 2 weeks to go to a country, you need to find something that you want to give back that can be done in 2 weeks. Your time frame for which you can help has a big impact on how far that help goes. And if you go to a country and you only spend 2 weeks there, and then you leave, and it doesn't actually gain traction, your time there is useless. So considering the time that you have in a location really can determine the impact that you make. If you have 6 months to give, then I'm sure you can definitely give a lot more than someone who's traveling off of a 2-week vacation. That being said, just because you only have 2 weeks doesn't mean you shouldn't try to help out, but
Yeah,
just
absolutely. Yeah,
be cognizant of the time frame you have and what you can do with your time ultimately.
for sure. Yeah, spot on.
So I think a major part of thoughtful traveling is not just feeling thoughtful and being mindful while traveling, but also reflecting on it. So what do you recommend in terms of journaling, and how often do you actually go back through your journals?
Good question. So I've done lots of different things over the years when it comes to journaling. I'll tell you at the moment what I do is I kind of do a bullet point journal while I'm there. So, just dot points every day, reminding myself of the most important things. It's come about. I used to write really long form stuff, but that was more when I traveled with my son, and he would go to bed and a couple of hours before me, and I would be in a room for a couple of hours with an evening, just to myself, and I couldn't leave, obviously. So I would write beautiful long form journals. But now he's really annoying, and he goes to bed like at the same time or after me. So I'm ready for bed, and so I've gone to this kind of, I don't have that much time, bullet form. But that's enough to jog my memory. I often go back to those and just kind of, it's amazing what a few dot points can remind you of. But I also put together kind of a really cheat and quick version of a photo book, so that we've always got books to hang on to and have a look at home. I throw them into, the companies that will print your photos into a book form. Also, back in the day, I would like type in captions and do all this fancy stuff. Who has time for that? Not me, anyway. So I throw the photos into the format, leave some blank spots, and then I get the books back. And then of an evening, over a period of time, I'll sit there with a Sharpie and just handwrite in, some memories that fit with those pictures. So those are the kinds of things I do to have like a physical kind of memory that helps us reflect, because my son and I will often look at those books and just remember about certain things. I also have lots and lots of photos up on our walls, and we'll often just kind of focus on one and reminisce about that particular moment or that particular day. And I think that's important. And in terms of I think it's really important to reflect on how travel changes us, on our kind of self-development and that kind of thing. It's something that I came to by accident, really, because when I first started traveling a lot and I was living abroad as well, I realized within kind of a year or so that my personality had kind of fundamentally changed. And I thought, whoa, this is weird, what's travel doing to me? But, thankfully in a positive way. And so ever since then, I've been kind of really, I guess, mindful and intentional about noticing how travel changes me, and trying to make travel change me more, often by stretching my comfort zone, or, taking more risks, or, just kind of noticing, I suppose. So I often think about that, perhaps a little obsessively, but, I do run a podcast all about thoughtful travel. So I get to talk to lots of people who've had similar experiences, and that helps me to reflect on my own as well. So so I'm perhaps not the typical person. I'm perhaps more obsessed than the average, but just, even on the plane on the way home, sitting back and thinking, what's different about the way I think after experiencing this trip, and what do I want to take back into my life now that I've seen the light about this or this topic. What can I change, or do I want to change anything or not? But at least reflecting on it.
So starting with the journal, I am a huge fan of the travel journal. Elliot found that out in Peru. So I started a travel journal. My first one was on my honeymoon with my wife, where we traveled to the Balkans. And
awesome.
to go back and open it and read through our experiences, you can immediately bring yourself back to the feelings that you had while you were there. We wrote down the dinners we had, and you can bring yourself back into those moments more so than a picture does, because you're reading your own thoughts that were jotted down in that moment. And it's really, it's it's so cool. It's one of the coolest things that I've ever done was write out our honeymoon as we did it. And I could
awesome.
not recommend that people do that more.
Yeah.
So that's something that I want to do now. So my daughter will be 2 when I go to Italy. And something that I want to do is write out her first trip, her first international experience, what she did, you know, how
She should write
it, how she experienced the food, you know, and to coincide with the pictures that she'll eventually go through. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm hoping that she really enjoys it.